Welcome in, Monday edition, Clay Travis, Buck Sexton Show. Go Big Orange. Big win of my Tennessee Volunteers over the Alabama Crimson Tide. We had a fantastic time there, but I will dive into that. Georgia's big win over Texas, USC, and Michigan tanking. How does the playoff race look? What have we learned in college football? We'll also have some fun with Trump going to McDonald's. But I want to start with a challenge from my dad. My dad turned 80 years old on October 17th. That is last week. Unfortunately, he recently broke his hip. He's recovering. I took him on Friday to go vote. And he was in a wheelchair. Thank you to everybody at the local voting place for helping assist us in getting him in to vote. I took a picture. I posted it on social media. He wanted me to share it with everybody and say, what's your excuse? My dad's got a broken hip. He's 80 years old. He made it out to vote early. You can too. Probably you don't have a broken hip. Probably you're not 80 years old. Make the time to go get your vote in. I did. I have disclosed my vote every year that I have been a public figure because I don't want you to be out there saying, oh, what is Clay's bias? What's Clay's perspective? Every single presidential election, and a lot of the midterms as well, I have told you exactly how I will vote. Not because I'm telling you that you should do the same as me, but because I think it's important for you to be able to analyze however you see fit, my own bias. I try to be as honest with all of you as I possibly can. There were 4 ballots on my election return. I went and voted early on Friday. I voted for President Trump and J.D. Vance. I voted for Senator Marsha Blackburn. I voted for my Congressman, Mark Green, and I voted for my Republican State House representative, whose name I should be telling you, but whose name, frankly, I have forgotten. So I apologize to my Republican State House representative. I voted for you, but I have forgotten your name. There were only 4 options on my ballot in Williamson County, Tennessee. I went and voted again, Trump, Blackburn, Mark Green, all the federal elections. You can vote however you want. You can think I'm a moron. You can vote the exact opposite. Vote, vote, vote. I am just telling you how I voted, and I'm challenging you because my 80-year-old dad, God bless him, wanted me to share with you that he voted with a broken hip from a wheelchair at 80 years old. If he can do it, you can too. Get out and vote early. Many different states out there now allowing early voting. Trend lines very positive for Donald Trump. But you guys get to decide, get your votes in, and then let's see what happens. We're 15 days out from the election. All right, college football. How about those Tennessee Volunteers? I was up in Knoxville with my 2 youngest sons, my wife, and one of their friends, and it was as loud of a stadium as a stadium could possibly be during the daylight hours. Tennessee got the win. Defense is elite for the Volunteers, has not allowed more than 19 points for anyone. Alabama with 2 losses before November for the first time since Nick Saban's first year in 2007. What's going on both sides of the ball? I'll actually start with Alabama. Again, I like to be able to sit and watch the full game in the stadium up high where you can look out over the field and see the all 22 as opposed to watching it on television. Here's what I saw. Alabama, if you can stop Jalen Milroe from running, he had 14 carries for 11 total yards, so Tennessee shut him down. Does not have a very good running game. They're not elite at the running back position. They don't create great avenues to run. And so Alabama, if you have the ability to mirror Jalen Milroe and take him out of the game, is actually not very dynamic in the running game. Also, Ryan Williams, to his credit, did you know he's 17 years old? Is 17 years old, and he is an incredible talent. But if you roll coverage in his direction and or have a corner who is able to take him for much of the game one-on-one, Alabama doesn't have a second or third option that scares you. And so if you force Jalen Milroe to be a drop-back passer and you mirror him with your linebackers and have the talent to keep him from getting outside and making big plays, Alabama's not very good offensively. And Tennessee was able, to a large extent, to corral the Alabama offense based on that. It's the same game plan Vanderbilt put in place, same game plan that South Carolina put in place. Other than the first half against Georgia, Alabama has not been very good this season. Okay, so that's the start. On the Alabama side, defensively, I don't think Alabama's very good. They're young in the secondary. Tennessee had receivers running wide open all day. In the first half, Nico missed him. He still wasn't perfect in the second half, but he dropped a dime to Dante Thornton on 3rd and 6 when Tennessee was trailing 10-7 that I think in many ways flipped the game. Later threw a great touchdown pass to Brazel for Tennessee to get up 21-17. Tennessee was a better team. Outgained Alabama. Even with a third straight first half where Tennessee didn't score, it felt like Nico may have turned the page and become a big-time quarterback in the second half against Alabama. Again, I was there watching in person. What do we think about the Tennessee defense? I told you. I think their top 10 caliber defense really legit. Tennessee offensively, really good at running back with Dylan Sampson, but teams have started to stack the box against Tennessee and dared Nico to beat them in the passing game. And for much of the last 3 games, he hasn't done a great job of it. He hasn't popped a big play. He hasn't scared people on the defensive side, and they're saying, we're going to make you beat us with your young quarterback. He did well enough in the second half to make that a reality, even after 2 missed field goals in the first half. Even after 3 turnovers in the first half, Tennessee was only down 7-0. I loved this game. I loved the playing of Dixieland Delight. I'm glad that my wife convinced me to drive up and back in the same day and take everybody on the day, basically, of the game. Otherwise, I would not have necessarily gone because it stinks, frankly, to travel and watch your team lose and then have the whole drive back. I told you that I loved the blood bank guarantee on the under, which we cashed with easily in this game. I told you I thought the final would be 20-17 one way or the other. Tennessee ends up winning it 24-17. I was very close. And Tennessee now has got an opportunity, even if they lose to Georgia, to potentially make the playoff. We'll get into that in a sec. But I asked you guys an interesting question, and I want to make sure that I get the numbers right here. I asked you whether you thought that there was a part of Kalen DeBoer questioning his decision to go and end up playing for the coaching for Alabama instead of Washington. And I'm scrolling through because I want to make sure that I get the votes right. My theory is that Kalen DeBoer regrets leaving Washington right now. And you might say, okay, Clay, why do you say that? Why do you think that is the reality? Because he had Washington rolling. They lost the national championship game to Michigan, but he's had a lot of success there. He gets to live in Seattle. He's outside of the proverbial fishbowl of the craziness of SEC football, and he can have a somewhat normal life while making a normal salary in Seattle, which is a crazy left-wing city, but still a very beautiful place to live. Okay, why do I bring all that up? Because I think there are a lot of people who have not lived in the South that don't know what the pressure cooker of SEC football really is. And he will never say it publicly, but I think that Kalen DeBoer regrets leaving Washington right now after losses at Vanderbilt and after losses at Tennessee. 33,000 of you and change have voted so far. 69% of you agree with me and think that Kalen DeBoer is regretting the decision to leave Washington and go coach at Alabama. I know a little bit about this in terms of trying to follow a legend. Buck and I now are on daily radio after the legendary Rush Limbaugh passed. We now have been doing our show for about 3.5 years. It was a real decision for me whether I wanted to leave my national sports talk radio show and go take over in this time slot. It's been, thankfully, a huge success. Buck and I, if we wanted to, iHeart would sign us to lifetime contracts doing this show. We'll see what ends up happening. All of my deals end basically at the end of next year. So I've got a lot of decisions to make about what I want to do going forward. I feel very fortunate. As I've told you guys for a while, I feel like I won the lottery. And when I woke up the day after I won the lottery, that's after I sold OutKick, I wanted to do the same jobs that I was already doing. I feel like I have the best jobs out there. But I'm in a fortunate position where I don't have to work anymore. I could throw up the deuces, I could retire, and I could ride off in the sunset, and however many years I've got left, I don't have to work anymore. So I'm going to figure out what I want to do at the end of next year when my sale of OutKick, most of the time when you sell a company, if you're a part of the company and a key man effectively as a part of the company, they sign you on to continue with the company for some time. So I am signed for radio, TV, OutKick, everything, basically through the end of next year. And then we'll see what happens. Maybe I'll decide before then. I don't know. Sometime next year, I think I'll decide what I want to do going forward. But my point on that is it's a challenge to take over for a legend. And there's that cliche in sports, and I thought about this a lot when the Rush offer was made to me, that you don't ever want to be the guy who follows the guy. You want to be the guy who follows the guy who follows the guy. And I think Kalen DeBoer is finding out now that the pressures are unique in Alabama. He's had real failure in losing to Vanderbilt. I would imagine right now, as my friend Paul Feinbaum starts his show, that there is an uproar in Alabama. And Kalen DeBoer basically has to win out for the rest of the year now, or there is going to be a mob in Tuscaloosa that is angry over how things have gone. And by the way, it doesn't get easy for him because he immediately has to turn and his team has to play against Mizzou. And I don't think Mizzou is awful, and I don't think Alabama's that great. What has happened is the invincible aura, the armor that Alabama wore in the Nick Saban era is gone. And what's happening is people are seeing that Alabama is just a normal SEC team now. That aura of invincibility, that the fact that they wore basically a coat of armor, it's all gone. And what usually happens when a legend hangs up the whistle, retires, we saw this with Pat Summitt at Tennessee. We saw it with Dean Smith at UNC. There are a lot of examples out there of this occurring. Things get a little bit worse every single day. And at some point that manifests itself. And I want to point to two different things that to me happened that Nick Saban would have never allowed to happen if he were still in charge. And I wrote about this in my starting 11. But to me, first of all, Malachi Moore losing his temper at the end of the Alabama Vanderbilt game and kicking the football never would have happened if Nick Saban were still the coach. I don't remember ever seeing a player lose it like that, much less a captain. And if you think about it, the other thing that happened was there was a 15-yard penalty called on Alabama wide receiver Kendrick Law. Now, I actually think it should have been offsetting penalties. If you remember, an Alabama player, basically Law, slapped Boo Carter, a Tennessee defensive back. When that happened, Boo Carter kind of fired back but missed and didn't really make contact. Alabama got flagged 15 yards. Now, if I were the official in the SEC, I actually think that should have been offsetting penalties because I hate to see something that significant happen. But this is now 2 times down the stretch in close games against Vanderbilt and Tennessee in the space of 2 weeks where Alabama's discipline has fallen apart. I don't think that would have happened under Saban. Also, 4th and 22. Kalen DeBoer has to punt there. You're not probably going to convert a 4th and 22 against Tennessee. Now, he was fortunate to get the ball back. Then they threw an interception shortly thereafter, big interception from Tennessee. But what in the world are you thinking going for it on 4th and 22? I just thought it was a sign, frankly, of not understanding the situation. I actually think when Tennessee got the stop there and got the ball back. Josh Heupel should have also gone for it on 4th and 2 instead of kicking the field goal to go up 7 and allow Alabama to get the ball back, even though his defense was playing well. Tennessee had missed 2 field goals. I would have, given how well Dylan Sampson was running the ball for Tennessee, I would have gone with my best 4th and 2 play and tried to end the game once and for all right then and there after Tennessee had already missed 2 field goals. I was concerned about getting a block like happened to USC, which we'll talk about in a minute. But for Josh Heupel now, Josh Heupel looking forward for Tennessee. I want to make sure I get the other thing is, how about Aaron Hodges, who is Alabama's director of player personnel, walking into the stadium with a cigar already in his mouth? That stuff doesn't happen with Saban. This is not a well-coached team on the offensive or defensive side of the ball, to me, and they already look like they're missing the discipline that Nick Saban ingrained. As for Josh Heupel, here's a crazy stat for you. Josh Heupel went 11-2, 9-4, and now he's sitting at 6-1. I believe I am correct that makes him 26-7 over his last 33 games. Did I do the math there right? I think I did. 26-7 over his last 33 games. Solid, right? Here's the bigger part to me that is amazing about Josh Heupel. And Adam, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this. In the 32 games that Tennessee played against Alabama or Florida, 2 yearly rival games, Tennessee was 1-31 against Alabama and Florida in the previous 32, okay? Josh Heupel is now 4-2 against Florida and Alabama in the last 6, after Tennessee was 1-31 against Florida and Alabama in the prior 32. In other words, in 2 of the biggest rivalries, I would argue the 2 biggest rivalries for most Tennessee fans, Florida and Alabama, Josh Heupel has gone from 1-31, Butch Jones beat Florida 1 time, to 4-2 in the last 6. He has won 4 of the last 6 and has won 2 out of 3 against both Florida and Alabama now, winning 4 games at Neyland Stadium, losing on the road once in the last 6 at both Florida and Alabama. So that's a pretty amazing transformation. We'll see whether Tennessee can be 8-1. Should beat Kentucky, should beat Mississippi State, but they should have beaten Arkansas, so you got to be careful. But Tennessee should be 8-1 going on the road at Georgia to potentially play for a chance to go to the SEC championship game, get into the playoff for sure. If they were to win that game, I think Georgia will win it, which allows me to transition to the biggest game of the weekend. Georgia, completely dominant against Texas in Austin. And I'm scrolling through my starting 11 because there's a couple of different things I want to hit. But first, I want to tell you about the first half. Here's the stats from the first half. Georgia allowed 38 total yards, just 2 rushing yards, had 5 sacks, 7 tackles for loss, forced 3 turnovers, and held Texas 0 for 7 on 3rd down in the first half against the Longhorns. Kirby Smart's team dominated, maybe the single best half played by any team in college football. He played so well, Kirby Smart's defense did, that there was a panic from Steve Sarkisian, and he actually benched Quinn Ewers a bit and went to Arch Manning because they were getting dominated to such an extent. I think you have to question a lot about what went on with Texas. To me, incredible performance from the Georgia defense to take command. Let me also say this. Big failure by the SEC and how they responded to what I think is fair to say was a blown call on defensive pass interference. But the Texas fan base rains down garbage on the field. The SEC has fined them $250,000 for doing it. But as all that is going on the field, they changed the ruling on the call, reversed their call. So you actually rewarded Texas and their fan base for acting out. Now, the call was wrong, but I think Kirby Smart and Georgia in general are correct that you can't say if a fan base throws a big enough fit on the field that you can change a judgment call, which is exactly what the SEC did. If anything, Texas was rewarded for the way that their fan base responded here. So, huge win for Georgia, notwithstanding that. Georgia, to me, even with Carson Beck playing poorly and throwing multiple interceptions, really played the best game so far, if you consider the caliber of the opponent, of anybody on the field so far. Now, several other different takeaways. I'd encourage you to go read the starting 11. It's pinned at the top of my account at Clay Travis, and you won't be able to miss all these takes. But Big 12. Huge comeback wins from BYU and Iowa State to remain undefeated. As we start to look towards the playoff picture, there's a possibility of the Big 12 stealing a playoff bid, which could be significant for the Big 10 and the SEC. Also, Miami and Clemson continue to win and advance, suggesting that they could be matching up in the ACC championship game and taking 2 bids in the ACC as well. Why does that matter? 1 non-Power 5 conference team has to be included. If you get 2 from the Big 12 and 2 from the ACC, that takes up 5 of the overall bids, which leads just 7 for the Big 10 and the SEC. Well, I would say the Big 10 has 4 playoff contenders right now. 5 if you believe Illinois is going to beat Oregon, which I do not. So I'm saying Big 10, Oregon, Penn State, Ohio State, and Indiana are all playoff contenders. And Indiana, sitting at 7-0, has a real chance to go 11-1 and only lose 1 game against Ohio State. So that story is out there. And Ohio State, if they go on the road and lose against Penn State, what real impressive outcome can you point to for Ohio State? I think you just have to kind of factor that in. And certainly if Ohio State were to lose to Indiana, that would be pretty disastrous for them. So we'll see how the Buckeyes play going forward. But in the SEC, there are 7 teams alive right now for the college football playoff. And you could end up in a situation where 7 teams all finish 10-2. I thought before the season that if you went 10-2 or better in the SEC or the Big Ten, you were virtually guaranteed a playoff spot. I'm not sure that that is going to be the case going forward. And there is a scenario where Texas, Georgia, Tennessee, Missouri, Alabama, LSU, and Texas A&M, that is 7 different teams all finish at 10-2. It's unlikely, but it could happen, and I laid it out in my starting 11. Think about how crazy it could get. Texas wins out but loses at A&M. They would be 10-2. Tennessee wins out but loses at Georgia. They would be 10-2. Georgia wins out but loses at Ole Miss. They would be 10-2. Ole Miss wins out. They would be 10-2. LSU wins out but loses to Alabama. They would be 10-2. Alabama wins out. That means beats LSU. They would be 10-2. Missouri wins out but loses to Alabama. They would be 10-2. Texas A&M wins out but loses to LSU. I believe, based on my math here, that then you end up in a scenario where you have a bunch of different 10-2 teams. In that scenario, by the way, A&M and LSU would be meeting in the SEC title game, but who else gets in? I think it's a great question. Now, Michigan and USC both look awful. Congratulations to Illinois. Dominated Michigan, held them to 7 points. The Wolverines look like a 6-6 team. Meanwhile, USC loses to Maryland to fall to 3-4 and drop Lincoln Riley, I believe I'm correct in this, to 5-9 in his past 14 games at USC. And as South Carolina also dominated in Shane Beamer's return to Oklahoma, as Josh Heupel did, in leaving Oklahoma, it's possible that Lincoln Riley destroyed the Sooner program and has destroyed the USC program. This is a full-on calamity at two major programs, SC and Michigan, that do not look much better than 6-6 on the season. 1 year after Jim Harbaugh wins a title, Sherrone Moore falling apart, Lincoln Riley falling apart. Meanwhile, Billy Napier, back to 4-3, probably can beat Florida State, who has fallen and just continues to be a disaster, sitting at 1-7, I think I'm correct now, on Florida State, in a collapse the likes of which we have never seen for a Power 5 conference team to go from 13-0 in the regular season. I know they got waxed by Georgia, but to now be losing to Duke for the first time ever, FSU is a mess. Florida can probably win that game if they can win one of their brutal stretch games. I jotted it down. They got Georgia, Texas, LSU, and Ole Miss after the bye week. That is pretty brutal and crazy. Army, Navy both keep winning. Both schools 7-0 for the first time since 1926. Both teams ranked. Vanderbilt also into the top 25 at 5-2. Congratulations to the Commodores. Now, here is my top 10. Based entirely on the field results, Oregon, basically the last major conference team that's truly been challenged, at number 1 overall. I've got Georgia number 2, and Georgia has the best 2 wins of the season on the road against Texas and neutral site against Clemson. I've got Ohio State 3, Texas 4, Penn State 5. I think that basically has to be the top 5. You could argue about my configuration there, but I think most people watching college football would have that as the top 5. Then I've got Miami 6. I've got LSU 7. I've got Tennessee 8. And if you ask why I had LSU 7, Tennessee 8, Tennessee lost against Arkansas and LSU just waxed them. So I bumped LSU to 7, Tennessee to 8. Clemson to 9, and I've got Texas A&M at 10. Huge game against LSU coming up this weekend. That means for my playoff 12, I've got Oregon as my predicted Big Ten champ, Georgia as my predicted SEC champ, Clemson, which I think is playing right now the best in the ACC, even though Miami is still undefeated. And then I've got BYU as my Big 12 projected champ. Those would be the 4 teams that I believe get a bye. Then I've got Ohio State at 5. Ohio State would host Boise State in my playoff right now. I've got Texas at 6. They would host Indiana, who I have in as my 11 seed. I've got Miami as the 7. They would host down in South Florida, Texas A&M. It would actually be a rematch of last year's game down in Miami. And then I've got LSU at 8. They would host Tennessee, who I have in as my number 9. Now, SEC Power Rankings. And again, I would encourage you to go read the starting 11. Georgia 1, Texas 2, LSU 3, Tennessee 4, A&M 5. I think that has to be your top 5 in the SEC right now in some order. Then I've got Bama at 6 by virtue of their big win over Georgia. I've got Missouri at 7, even though they only have 1 loss. I have not been that impressed with Mizzou. I've got Vandy at 8. Again, congrats to the Commodores on rising into the top 25 for the first time since James Franklin was the coach there. I've got Ole Miss at 9. South Carolina at 10. Big win for the Gamecocks on the road against Oklahoma. Arkansas at 11. They got whipped pretty solidly by LSU. Florida at 12. The Gators are moving up in the world. Oklahoma all the way down at 13. Oklahoma, rest of this schedule looks brutal for them. They went back to Jackson Arnold now at quarterback. Kentucky at 14. Fired their offensive coordinator, basically. Kentucky at 14. Other than that performance against Ole Miss, the Wildcats have been a mess. Auburn at 15. They just can't get over the hump. It feels like they've led in virtually every game in the fourth quarter. And then I got Mississippi State slotted in at 16. But Mississippi State's been improving, not bad against Georgia, not bad against Texas A&M the past 2 weeks. So that is my breakdown of the college football landscape right now. Again, go read the starting 11 if you want this in more detail. I wanted to mention this as I finish today's show. Again, go vote, go vote, go vote. My 80-year-old dad with a broken hip can get out in a wheelchair. You can too. Donald Trump at McDonald's was genius. This is why Trump is going to win this election, in my opinion, because Kamala is now reverting as her closing argument to saying Trump is Hitler, Trump is Hitler. I would ask this of you. At the Al Smith dinner, Trump was hysterical for like 27, 28 minutes. At McDonald's, objectively hysterical that he's wearing an apron and still wearing his red tie. I'm telling you right now, Trump is better at proving that he is a relatively normal guy who is having a good time on the campaign. I saw that they put up a podcast today with Trump being interviewed by The Undertaker. Did Hitler tell great jokes? Did Hitler work in food service in the Nazi era? I don't remember that happening. 10% of left-wing Democrats and their media allies have Trump derangement syndrome and their brain is broken. The other 90% of us see that Trump is an imperfect leader, as all leaders are, but he is far from a fascist dictator. He is not Adolf Hitler. He has too good of a sense of humor, and he has too much fun on the campaign trail. I think Trump is pulling away from Kamala. There's a slow panic setting in. You saw Trump last night at the Steelers game against the Jets. We'll talk about this more, but I thought this is a perfect rebuttal to the closing argument of the Democrat Party. Kamala's campaign is desperate. I think she is going to lose Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona for sure. If I'm right on that, then all Trump needs to do is win one of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And I actually think Trump has a very good chance to win all three of those, plus Nevada. Love all of you. DBAP unless you need to SBAP. I will be back tomorrow. This is OutKick, the show, and I will see you guys. I will see you guys soon. Tomorrow, in fact.